Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar, Process Automation Trends Uncovered. So before we get started, I would like to take care of some housekeeping tips and just offer a few general tips for viewing today's webinar. So the webinar is being recorded. You will receive a copy of the webinar post-recording. And just to let you know that if you have any troubles during this webinar or any issues at all, please email info@flowforma.com for assistance. Throughout the webinar, your lines will be muted. You can use the Q&A function on the right-hand side of your screen to ask any questions. We will cover these at the end. After the webinar, we just ask you to fill in a short survey that will pop up as well. Thank you so much. So our speakers for today, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome John Bratincevic to today's webinar. John is a senior analyst from Forrester and his research focuses on citizen developers, low-code development platforms, and digital process automation. Lots of themes there that we'll be covering today. We're also joined by Jared Newman, CTO here at FlowForma. Jared has over 20 years experience designing and delivering process automation solutions that have allowed businesses to integrate and automate their operations to deliver better customer service experience and improve efficiency. Welcome guys, how are you both today?
Good, thank you.
Great, good to hear. So we'll get straight in. We'll kick off with our first question. So, Jared, I might point this one towards you. So, great. The democratization of development is accelerating. But, Jared, could you start by sharing how you would recommend listeners empower developer strategies regarding process automation, especially in 2022?
Yeah, sure. So, I think if we look back a bit on 2021, first of all, I think what we've seen is a real, I suppose, growth in the whole understanding of the citizen developer role in organizations. And I think businesses are understanding more about what that means to them and also what kind of benefits they can get from encouraging that kind of role to develop within their organization. So overall in 2022, we'd expect this trend to continue with organizations investing more in building out their citizen developer teams. So then the question is really, how do you actually empower these people? Well, I think like most change type projects, one of the key things is to get a senior level buy-in in the organization. So you're looking for somebody here who's, I suppose, an enthusiastic supporter of the whole citizen developer concept, has bought into the kind of benefits that the organizations can actually, I suppose, achieve through the use of business type people to do system and application development and to automate their processes rather than using scarce professional IT resources. So first of all, you need to get some sort of senior level buy-in. Now, the second point is around establishing what I'm going to call a center of excellence. And this really is about, I suppose, just getting some enthusiastic supporters, people who are willing to actually try things, who are willing to actually take those first steps to try and automate some of their processes. So a center of excellence might sound like a kind of, to a certain extent, a daunting thing to try and establish in an organization, but it really can start as simply with just one individual who's enthusiastic and who's also kind of prepared to, I suppose, mentor other people as they embark on their whole journey of citizen development. And third point I'd say is start. So I think it's very important to get an initial project going, because the sooner you get it going, the sooner you're going to actually understand more about what the benefits of using citizen developers are. You're going to see more about the benefits that can actually be achieved quite quickly in automating your actual processes. And the whole idea of no-code tools is that they support this kind of iterative development where you start, you measure, you improve, and you continue on that cycle through not just one, the automation of just one process, but through the automation of multiple processes. So really, the sooner you start digitizing processes, then the sooner you can start to improve them. So I think there's three kind of pointers just around trying to empower those strategies. John,
it's interesting you mentioned top-down support. Just in the last couple of weeks, I've had multiple clients come to me, and I usually talk to architects, and they're saying, my CIO asked me about citizen development. Could you help me with that? So this is apparently percolating at that level right now, which is very interesting to me, because in the past it was more of a couple levels down from that, people thinking about developer capacity. It seems like at the C level, it's become a very hot thing. I mean, you give a very thorough answer. if the question is democratizing and empowering people, one thing I always remind people of is that if your company is not very lean, so maybe people are kind of at full capacity, don't have time to do anything else, or they aren't expected or allowed to improve processes of their environment, that's a really hard starting point. So especially in those environments, but in any other one, the key to empowering people and getting momentum is finding people who have the time and the motivation and are good problem solvers. Right? So you find those who really understand the business problem or the process, or are really hot under the collar about making something better, and you start small with them and expand from there. And concretely, sometimes that can mean doing a hackathon. That's a pretty common technique we've recommended over the years. You do it, and then the people who are motivated show up, and you mentor them, right? Not just train them, mentor them. And the other is, if there are logical teams like a line of business or something, process improvement people or analyst people or special project people or project managers, people that have something on the backlog, or it's part of their normal job to improve things, like that's part of their job, then it's very logical to give them technology as a mechanism to do that better, or to satisfy the needs they've been asking you about forever, or what have you. But I mean, really that key is finding people that are motivated and have time, and then building on those successes and evangelizing it. Because if you want to empower people, they have to really want to do it and believe that it's a good thing, right? That you're there to help them and not just to, it's not just about the stupid corporate program, right? So.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'd say that, just in terms of the projects that we get involved in, I'd definitely agree with that. Finding the right people with the right motivation and the right kind of enthusiasm can really make a project very successful.
Same as any other maturation. You have your early adopters and that kind of thing, and you want to find those people because they're going to be your leaders and evangelists, and they're going to become probably experts, right, over time if you let them.
Absolutely. Yep. Okay.
Great, thank you guys. So question 2 then is around increasing customer expectations and market competition. So this definitely requires organizations to be more innovative and invest in continuous improvement. But a question that is asked all the time, and Jared, you might take this, is how do organizations foster this type of culture inside their business?
Yeah, sure. I'd say, in my experience over the years, particularly around process automation type projects, it's often difficult for organizations to actually get that kind of engine of innovation going within their own organization. And it's not that people have a shortage of ideas or suggestions or ways of improving things. It's often that there's a shortage of skills, funding, time, etc., to actually act on some of these ideas. And I think that's really one of the key things, is that you can actually start to deliver on some of the innovations that people are suggesting. And I think organizations are looking to address that, because what we would encounter more and more now is we would talk to heads of innovation, or basically people with innovation as part of their title. And I think that shows that organizations are looking now to, I suppose, formalize their approach to innovation and make it a key capability of their organization that they are continually innovating. So I'd expect that to continue in 2022. And I think just kind of following on from that, the how you enable this is, one, making it of strategic importance, and obviously appointing somebody with that sort of title with innovation in their role, so that somebody's proactively seeking it out in an organization is very important. And I think then the whole way of capturing ideas and how you can bring them forward in the business and how people can see their ideas being acted on is really vital too. And then early success, people want to see ideas that they're putting forward going through a whole process and actually delivering and making change in their organization and actually delivering benefit to the organization. And I think if you can start demonstrating that, then that in turn, that kind of primes the pump for innovation in your organization. You're going to get more people coming forward, more ideas coming forward, and allow then those ideas to go through the kind of standard evaluation process that you might have in place, so that you can filter out ideas and decide which ones are the highest priority ideas that you actually want to progress as an organization.
So the context of the question is, to me, is technology, right? I cover technology company, probably technologists or people interested in technology on the phone. What I think is missed sometimes is that low code, because it, compared to other development styles like high code or whatever, because it's so much faster, because there's quality built in and so on. And as you mentioned earlier, there's that natural iteration cycle that happens. It's a very logical medium for innovation. It's a very logical medium for trying things out and experimenting and accomplishing things and iterating. I actually have a research stream kicked off on this, on the intersection between low code and agile and innovation and so on. How that when the medium itself changes, your practices, it naturally sort of instills behavioral changes, right? Whether you intend to or not. So I think making the point that low code itself is an excellent engine for innovation as a development medium, that point needs to be made. But if you look then to the people and the practices, I mean, the reality is if you want an innovation culture, if you want people coming up with ideas and then those ideas being executed and tried out, you have to show rather than tell, which is kind of a life principle. So what I've seen people do is laying citizen development aside. Let's say there's a development team that's using low code. Not only do they execute on things quickly, but they show people very concretely that if they have an idea or a want or an aspiration or whatever, they do it. So for example, some of the firms I've spoken to, their standard for executing an application ideas or improvement to applications on low code is a few hours. You submit an idea, within a few hours, you turn it around. And what happens is if you do that enough, if you show people very concretely in the real world, not on PowerPoints or in theory, but in the real world, that if you want to try something, we'll do it. Or if you can go to the next step, we'll give you a way to do it and we'll help you. And you keep doing that over and over, like that starts creating that cultural understanding that I can actually, if I have an idea, it'll actually happen. It won't languish somewhere. I won't be burdened with all this bureaucracy and this pain and this justification. We're just going to try it. Like we care enough about you to go try and do it. And then tactically, another important thing people do is they consciously try to build those mechanisms into their solution. So for example, you'd be surprised how often this comes up. Teams that do really well and all the applications they make and the software they make, they build feedback mechanisms directly into the software. So there's a design standard. Every page has to have a suggested improvement button. And then they have to act on it, right? And they start creating those feedback loops or whatever. So doing rather than telling and using the fast medium to your advantage. You know, the improved economics allow you to experiment like crazy. So if you do that, what happens is people start coming up with ideas naturally. It's just because why wouldn't you, right? It's your baby and you care. And you see if you say something, it happens.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a powerful message. All right, condensing that cycle from ideas coming forward to actually being implemented is a really strong message and gives people a really good example of how innovation can take hold in an organization, how you can actually deliver on those benefits. So that's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Near live is kind of the standard.
Yeah, and it's nearly a scary concept compared to, say, traditional development approaches where things are taking a long time. And, you know, in larger organizations where you have the application backlog in place that IT teams are trying to work through, you know, people don't see ideas necessarily bubbling to the top for quite a while. So it's a really powerful message and a really strong way of encouraging it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
I've also seen, you mentioned innovation teams. I've seen innovation teams where they will specifically use low code as their medium for this reason. So got an idea for layering AI in to do this with that, and that it becomes their medium for doing it because it's the logical medium for doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay.
Great. So moving on then, so with no code driving citizen development movement, governance of this approach is definitely trending. Would you agree with this, Jared and John? And how do organizations manage the process of development?
Yeah, well, I can start off with that. And, you know, I think this is something that we've seen last year and also actually over the previous few years. And the issue of governance comes up again and again in terms of how you actually, I suppose, what kind of controls you can put in place around a citizen development type environment. So if you look at it from a CIO's point of view and from an IT leader point of view, I mean, they're all too familiar with the traditional concepts of end user application development and also shadow IT in organizations. And they're keen to avoid some of the problems that actually causes, you know, where you suddenly find out that the business is completely reliant on an application that was developed by somebody who actually is no longer in the business. So you're trying to avoid those kind of issues. So I think the key questions are, well, how do you go about developing, testing, and deploying these citizen developer applications? And then equally importantly, how do you actually go about supporting them? So if these issues aren't being addressed, then they can leave the organizations very exposed with unreliable or unsupported applications, which are actually critical to the business. So therefore, I think we're going to see a growth in the whole concept of tools and processes around the whole citizen development area, to try and put some sort of controls in place, but at the same time not to restrict it so that it effectively gets completely locked down and restricts that innovation capability that we just mentioned a few moments ago. So I think like we encountered this a few years ago where we were working with a client who wanted to automate actually hundreds of processes in a very short space of time. And they needed some sort of framework to control this and some sort of tools to allow them to manage this so that they could be sure that, you know, applications that were being developed and processes that were being automated were going through a rigorous set of checks as they went through, you know, development through to some sort of testing experience and then on into the live environment. So we actually built out some governance capabilities there in our product. And over this year, we'll continue to invest in that and continue to add capabilities to it as well, so that we can serve that citizen development community. John, what are you seeing out there?
This is so hard, especially at scale. This is the question I get all the time. I don't have a perfect prescriptive answer, is what I usually tell people. But we do have some principles we try to outline. When people are thinking about governance, basically the set of questions they should ask is like the who, what, where, when, how set of questions. So, okay, you want to use low-code, you want to citizen development, fine. Well, what does that mean? What's going to be your strategy and your governance approach? Do you want to think about who can develop? Is it going to be everybody or certain people or people with certain titles of training or certification, or how do you, what defines the developer pool? What are the rules? What can they develop? Like what kinds of use cases? And there's a lot of potential questions there around data and complexity and size and architecture and whatever else, customer facing, internal, that kind of thing. Then how, like what process you want to apply, right? Can they live develop? Do with spreadsheets. But you know, some things probably you shouldn't do that, right? They're going to get a certain level of complexity or importance. And it's like, well, how do you, right? But what's the process for development? And then some of those architectural and technical points like you talked about, or specific things like a testing requirement or whatever. So you answer all those questions. And what people can do if they take one version of the questions, usually they can kind of execute on that pretty well. Like anybody can develop if they ask, but no integrations, only spreadsheet replacement. And you made it, you own it, right? And we'll just monitor user costs or something, and you can't give it to outside people. But when you start scaling to more people, it needs to be more dynamic than that, and that's where it gets complex, because what you're building will determine how you build it. If you really should, right? If you really want to go big on this, or who's building it should determine how you're building it, or maybe other resource, you need someone to help you with this bit or whatever. And that's great on paper. I've met organizations that they're getting to that point where it's like, well, this is the process. If you're building something of this complexity, then you need someone to help you, or this risk profile, you need someone to help you, or no, it's that architecture, don't do it. What's really needed then, not only just on paper and coming up with the frameworks, which people are doing, the consultancies are doing, they're figuring it out, the services companies, there's independent firms that are starting to do it. We have some stuff on that. But the tools themselves need to mature to the point where all that's baked in. So the policies, the processes, all this particular business rules around what you develop and how and when needs to be baked into these platforms for real scale. Because what you see are companies that have 1,000 or 2,000 developers is the biggest I've seen. And they're doing well, they've got good results, but it's messy, right? Because they're managing it manually, and then they end up here, and then they have to unwind it or refactor it or go, oh, we need to rebuild this over here. And it's still good results, but it won't work for 50,000 people, right? It'll work for a few thousand. So all that needs to be baked into the platforms as a product. Here's your governance suite. Everything's executed by the SDLC. Here's your policies on who, what, where, when, why, how, and they're dynamic and they're enforced in the platform, and you can see it and watch it like a spider at the center of a web. Ultimately, I think that's where the products need to go, because they're not just selling development abstraction. They're selling safe, effective, scaled development with lots of people, and that means all the things I just said. So I know that was kind of a long answer, but this is a very interesting question, and the products and the practices all need to mature more before you can get to that huge scale that a lot of firms want to do.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of learning as well from what's happened from a software development perspective as well, and the stages that goes through. And we don't have to reinvent it all from a no-code point of view. We just take some of the best practices from that and build on those.
But having everybody do, dev test prod and some testing requirement and some sign up before you deploy for everything is ridiculous, right? Then everything will stay in spreadsheets because they won't want to put it in the thing. So you got to have different rules apply to different things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. Yeah. And I suppose it's all about assessing that risk from a CIO and IT leader perspective, and just making sure that it's under control, because they just want to avoid that end user development / shadow IT problems they got into in the past.
Yep. And then it has to be tactically managed.
Yep. Okay.
Great. Okay. So the next question then, hybrid working. Hybrid working is definitely going to be a global initiative. I know we're based in Dublin, Ireland, and it's been covering the news the last couple of days here as well. Lots of conversation going around it. But what would your tips be on developing and advancing a digital workforce in 2020? So maybe Jared, would you have any ideas around that?
Yep, sure. I suppose there's lots of things you can actually do here. I can pull out as for 3 or 4 things that spring to my mind. So I think one of the things is educating people, so that there's lots of ways you can educate them. You can educate them in various tools, you can educate them in approaches, you can educate them in methods and all that sort of stuff. But one of the best ways of educating people, I think, is making the kind of concepts that we're talking about here in terms of digitizing businesses and digital transformation. One of the best ways you can educate them is show them examples of it. So I think if you can get started, digitize some of your processes in place, bring other people along so they can understand what's happened, what's been achieved, and see the results of it, then that helps educate them as to what the art of the possible is. And then I think you obviously have to help them as well with training and various tools, etc., that they might be using, but try and support and mentor them to actually make them successful. I think as a second point, just measuring the results. One thing that motivates everybody is when you can see that you're actually making a change, and that change is actually delivering measurable benefits that you can articulate. So I think making sure that you measure the results, and as much as you and compare them to the before situation as much as you might or might not have statistics on or measurements on how your processes behave before you automated them. So I think if you look at that and make those results tangible to everybody in your organization, that's going to help. So I have a few other things, but I don't know, John, do you want to chip in a few there as well?
Well, I'm the low code analyst, so I always think about that. But what I have observed, I think, that is really relevant to this question, low code and citizen development, is what happens when you go through this exercise of finding people and enabling them and showing them how to use a platform and so on. And you as you said, you mentor them on the right things. It's not just application development. It's design thinking, it's problem solving, it's what problem you're trying to solve and how do you experiment to get there and really understand and empathize with your users and all that stuff. Over time, what happens is people do this, especially if they embrace it, it tends to teach them systems thinking. So they tend to become systems thinkers organically. So I think of it as the intersection between lean transformation and digital transformation. So lean transformation, you want the management system where everyone's iterating all the time, and you have this respect for people, and people bring their brains to work and are constantly experimenting toward the target condition, blah, 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 blah. Businesses want that and have wanted that for years. What happens is when you give people these mediums to make applications, where you're designing processes and you're designing systems and machines, you're connecting those machines, you see how when you flip this one lever, it affects something downstream, you start becoming a systems thinker because you're building systems. So you see outcomes that deliberate in design, you start seeing the connections between things. And of course, you have to do the human side of it as well. You have to think about politics and change management and project management and all that if you're really owning this thing. So this is the point I make all the time is like, oh, we want people to think digitally and, oh, we want systems thinkers. And I'm like, well, have people build systems through these abstracted environments. Like if they take to it and you mentor them, they will become those people. I'm not saying a super, super tactical, super, like not a super critical thinker will become, like a top-notch engineer. But they will resemble that person a lot more. I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen from people you wouldn't think of as the extremely methodical, logical problem solver, where when they were exposed to this for a while, they started seeing the world in that way. So to me, I always harp on that. Like the medium of low code and teaching people to build things tends to change how they view business and think about software and technology generally.
Yeah, I think as well, I was just wondering about the kind of concept that, that you'll see citizen developer skills popping up on people's resumes when you're actually recruiting, and it's obviously something desirable that you should be looking for, because that can help accelerate organizations' transformation as well. If they manage to find people who've been there, done that before, it can really bring a lot of knowledge to the organization.
Our expectation is that over the next several years, they'll start becoming a job requirement. So you're going to be an operations director or a project manager, wherever it is the company's focusing, you have to have skill in Platform X, or will be willing to use Platform X.
Yeah, and well, just one other point I had was around the kind of concept of creating internal influencers. So, I mean, you really do need those people, I think, in an organization who are going to evangelize it, who are prepared to try things out, and who are going to always look at things with a digital mindset to see how we could make things more effective, how we could automate things. And I think if you can create that kind of group of influencers, they can spread the word internally and try and educate more people and convince more people that they actually want to get on board with this and try and automate as much as they can and transform their processes from potentially manual processes into way more automated ones.
Yep, agree.
Okay.
Okay, thanks guys. So we understand that there is an importance for organizations to have an ability to push and pull information between various systems, but I think this is going to be a trending topic in 2022, and I'd like to know what trends or advancements that you see happening in 2022 to speed up integration. So Jared, would you like to kick us off there?
Yeah, sure, I can do that. So look, I think one of the points, first of all, is just to say, you know, there's a continuing growth in the interest and requirement for integration of processes with all sorts of applications. So we see that every day. We're being asked more and more about how we actually handle this. So I think, you know, generally integrating cloud applications to other cloud applications is not that difficult. I think there's lots of hooks and things that are built into those applications to permit the kind of integrations that you need. And then when you talk about integrating back into, say, on-premise applications, that can become a little trickier. And then when you talk about integrating into legacy applications, that can become even more difficult. And particularly the kind of skill level goes up, I suppose. You go through those three different kind of types of applications. But I mean, overall integration is a really common requirement in the process space. You don't have to integrate your process with existing systems to be successful and to achieve, you know, significant return on your investment in digital process automation. But a lot of organizations look at processes as a kind of layer that can be spread across a whole range of applications that can actually try and pull them together and to allow people actually interact with them in a simple way. So I think there is just a growing demand at all levels for it. So some of the stuff that I'd see going on is the growth of the consumerization of integration. And there's a couple of really well-known integration platforms out there on the web which tie into hundreds of different applications. So I think they make a great job of allowing citizen developers configure what were traditionally complex in integrations, but you're actually doing it in a couple of clicks with kind of pre-configured templates. So I think they're really good, and I'd expect those to continue to grow and go from strength to strength over the next year. The custom and legacy apps are a little bit difficult, as I said before, so it's still very achievable. And actually, just even from some of our recent examples with our customers, it looked like we were having some, you know, we were going to have some difficulties integrating with some legacy apps that one of our customers used. But when we engaged with IT, we found out that they'd actually built kind of common interface into these applications that we could simply reuse. So that made life a lot easier and allowed us to achieve some really good integration for one of their processes at a kind of very low cost. So I suppose from my own point of view, what from a FlowForma point of view, what we invested in 2021 was building out some of our integration capabilities, particularly around REST API. So this obviously opens us up to integrate with thousands of other applications. So we're going to continue to work with that and obviously continue to deliver it all in a no-code way so that you don't require specific technical skills. But the whole integration landscape is just, it's constantly developing, and there's a constant demand from our customers that we see in the market anyway. Looking for more and more integration capabilities. What are you seeing, John?
Integration is hard. There's a reason that there are products focused on doing just that, like you said. Our survey data shows that low-code platforms, no-code platforms, whatever label people apply. Most things can usually be done through the tooling. That's kind of the idea. But where people consistently need to code is integration. That's one of the main areas where they'll say, yeah, that last 5% or whatever in an enterprise app, in a big app, is often integration. So I kind of take a market view on this. Everybody kind of gets it. That's complicated. I think on the low code and DPA platform side, I think people are going to keep investing in connectors and more complex connectors to do that. I think on the working practices, a lot of vendors will talk about, and companies will talk about how your coders, your trained developers, how they need to move off some of the more basic application work. More business people should do that, and they need to move to more complex things as a generic principle. One of those complex things tends to be integration, especially in legacy environments, like you said. So I absolutely anticipate, like in environments where they're maturing this in a big way, the coders will do less application definition and more, okay, we got to get this old system to talk to this new system. How do we do that? Doing more of the complex integration problems. And in service of that also, I expect there to be acquisitions. So I expect some of the low code and DPA players to maybe buy some iPaaS players to quickly expand their capabilities. That makes sense. And I also wouldn't be surprised if some of the iPaaS players, the integration players, get into low code, either by building their own or acquiring, because I think a lot of people are seeing that sort of, well, you've got these app building platforms or these process platforms, the integration platforms, they all kind of need stuff from the others, and everyone's sort of converging towards a mega product thing. So I think that'll happen more between iPaaS and low code, I guess is my point.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think some of those iPaaS platforms are very impressive in terms of what they actually do and how quickly you can actually get integrations up and running. And I suppose we will just see more and more support for those in the various no code, low code environments. Definitely something we're particularly interested in at the moment.
Yep.
Cool. Thank you, guys. So I know we've been chatting about citizen developers, adoption and speed, but John, why is digitization actually important to organizations? Why should they start digitizing their processes?
Well, I always say that being digital means you turn everything about a business into software and then change it as the business changes in near real time. That's what I always say. Because people historically, I think, see software as a high risk selective investment. And I think that view needs to change. And with the process lens, there's one very important reason for that, that you can clearly articulate. And that's the principle of standard work. So in the process world, the idea is you have a standard for how something is done, and that's your foundation for continuous improvement. And you improve on that, right? We want to continuously improve. We got a standard how it's done, and then we improve from that standard. The reality is, if something isn't done by a machine or isn't somehow encoded digitally, there is no standard. It's imaginary, right? It's a theory. We'll write it down and then we execute it manually or semi-manually, and then we audit it or train and keep trying to get back up to the standard, right? And there's sort of this cycle of constantly beating things back up to meet the standard. When you digitize things, when you turn a process into an application or a workflow or whatever, what that means is the standard work is real and there's no other way to do it. It's a real foundation to improve on. So it's visible, you can connect it, and then it's in the immediate term, it's absolutely inflexible. There's no other way to do it. It is an actual standard where there's no other option. And you can't change it in the immediate term. You got to execute it. But in the short term, if it's built in low code, it's absolutely flexible because you can change it. So if you want to add another approval in the process, simple example, you can. And now that's the new standard. So this is the new standard work. So the actual improvement cycle has actually happened and it's permanent. You don't slide back because of some audit or manual execution or whatever. Oh, we'll just keep training you into it. So with the process lens, it's actually stupid simple. Processes need to be digitized because that's your foundation of standard work and that's your foundation for continuous improvement. Then you continuously improve digitally in the real world. And then that mechanism starts like we were talking about earlier. And so many people don't think about things that way. They think about processes as a construct on paper that you have to train people on. And the reality is it should be reflexively trained the bits and bytes because the bits and bytes are a fundamentally different medium. That's how standard work really happens. So that's how I kind of think about it.
Yeah, I mean that kind of traditional approach to looking at process automation is interesting. I mean the BPM projects of old, it was all about understanding exactly what the existing process was, getting great agreement with the business. That's what it was. Then looking at kind of redesigning the process, and then looking at how you could possibly automate that and that. So I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right with these.
I have to interject. I'm sorry. Like, I will often get into these minor debates with people. They'll be like, well, you don't just mean digitizing how we do it today. We need to re-engineer it and be smart and all this. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm not saying do stupid things. I'm not saying if there's a defect in your process, let's turn that into software. You're like, hey, there's a defect, I'm going to ignore it. But that old school way of thinking about it, when there was this separation between business and process and then technology, and you had to engineer your ideal on paper and then turn it into technology, that's not right. Like you need to you need to look at it and go, okay, here's some obvious improvements we can make. This is basically how I want to do it. All right, boom, 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 turn it into a process. You go, oh, that isn't right, improve it. Oh, that isn't right, improve it. Right. The complete separation between process engineering and design and development and digitization is wrong, I think. I'm not saying do it stupid, but that like ideally figure it out and then execute, that isn't right either. It's a very different working mechanism. You digitize, experiment, and this is the whole point of Agile. People are like, we can't plan it all, just start. Same thing with process. But
Yeah,
now
no,
it's
I
just
completely agree with that. Yeah, because I mean, those traditional BPM projects, the amount of effort that had been expended by the time you actually got to actually try and automate everything at that stage, you're always in trouble in terms of maintaining momentum and enthusiasm for the project. So yeah, absolutely, with no code, low code, I mean, the approach is, well, automate and then measure and then improve and just iterate through that cycle. So I very much be.
You know, there's a really interesting analogy to the physical world. What some plants, manufacturing plants, would do in order to enable future continuous improvement, they would build the plants and build the machines with change in mind. So they wouldn't like, you know, physically make everything absolutely automated and absolutely inflexible, which they could never change. So they could never change the different product lines or never adjust the process. They would try to build manufacturing flexibility into the plant itself, so then you could reconfigure and change things and improve processes. And it's a very similar thing here. If you're not pouring it in concrete, then you can just do it, right? And if you can develop quickly, you can just do it. It's a very different mindset to the planning and thinking and execution and the relationship between the two.
Yeah, absolutely. It's much more iterative and way more agile. And yes. I suppose overall, like then as you get into the whole digitization of your processes, then ultimately that leads to, you know, more, I suppose, processes that deliver a better customer experience ultimately, in that you've got a consistent engagement with your customers and they know what kind of results you're going to expect out of your processes. And also, I think also helps the workforce as well, in that it can eliminate an awful lot of kind of manual workarounds that might be in place and some of the kind of lack of understanding of exactly how the business works. So I think
yes.
All of those things are really beneficial to organizations that undertake the whole process automation and digitalization approach.
Yeah, so you don't have all your DNA hidden in paper and spreadsheets and workarounds, which is the reality in most environments.
It sure is. It sure is. When you get out there and see what people are actually using to run their overall businesses, at times, you know, you see obviously a prevalence of spreadsheets. They're filling the gaps in many cases, and that's because they're an environment that people know how to use. So, you know, when you give them other tools that are as easier to use than spreadsheets, then there's a lot of possibilities open up.
Some of the great companies of the world that you think of as really digital still run some stuff on spreadsheets, and they're starting to get their brain around this. Like, oh, we need to turn that into apps too, but we don't have time to do that. So they'll use low-code tools in some areas, and they're trying. You know, I mean, it's everywhere.
Yeah. Okay.
Great, and I think that leads us nicely to our next question. So around employee resistance. So we do see that there can be sometimes some employee resistance to change, and that can lead to poor adoption of digital solutions as well. But can you share some tips for our audience on how they might be able to achieve process digitalization by overcoming barriers to change in their business? Jared, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, sure. So look, I think it's very natural to have a resistance to change or changing what people are used to and what they know. So it can be difficult to get people to move from their kind of current position to a future state. But I think that if you look at what you really want to try and do is lead people there. And I've mentioned it a few times earlier, but I do think that showing them what can be achieved and creating those kind of lighthouse processes within an organization that people are drawn to, so that they can see the kind of benefits that can be achieved and how automation can help improve the way that they actually work, so that you're encouraging people to move on from the current status quo into a future state. So I think that's really important. And I think, you know, I mentioned before as well about being able to articulate the benefits as well. And I think making those relevant to people so that they understand them, again, helps everybody understand what could be achieved and allows them move forward from their current mindset. I think communication is really important. Now, this is hardly just specific to digital process automation initiatives. It obviously applies to most change, but I think it's just important to keep reiterating that, like what we're trying to do, what it's actually going to achieve, and what are the next steps, and just to make sure that you're constantly communicating that out so that people can understand, you know, that it is an ongoing initiative. It's something really important to the organization and in fact vital to its future and potentially to its ongoing survival. So I think it's just important that everyone understands that. One other thing as well is, you know, when you're starting on this journey, one of the questions is, well, what kind of process should I pick? So you're trying to create this process that people can relate to and that you're going to use as an internal reference so that people's, you know, barriers to change are reduced. And I think the thing is there to try and pick the right kind of process so that it's a process that should be important to the organization. People understand it generally, potentially a wider audience in the organization understand it. So it's important, it's understandable, and automating it's going to actually deliver some benefit in a defined period of time. So I think it's important to kind of pick your first process and make sure that you can deliver on it and that it delivers the benefit. And you don't have to pick one that's overly complex there or only used on a number of occasions. It should be something that's important to the business and that other people in the organization can relate to. And the final thing I'd say is just find those champions, the people who are enthusiastic, the people who want to go out there, who want to improve things, who are happy to mentor other people, to explain to them, to talk to them, to understand their concerns, their requirements, etc. Find those people who are your internal influencers who can actually try and overcome some of these barriers. So, John, from your point of view, what would you add to that, or how would you see it?
Well, one important thing is if you're approaching this as a way to cut people, they're never going to want to do it, and they'll know. So if you're approaching process digitization and automation as a way to reduce headcount, then go into those heads and saying, hey, buy into this automation thing, will never work. So you have to have kind of a pretty solid cultural foundation of, that's not why we're doing this. We're doing this to make our product and our experience and, you know, internal and external experiences excellent. We're not doing this just to get rid of people, because if you are, then they will never buy in and they will see you coming a mile away. So if that isn't sincere, then I don't know what you're stuck. Assuming you pass that barrier, then you talked about finding, you know, the enthusiastic people and so on. I mean, you always want to start where people want to do it. You always want to start with willing participants, not unwilling participants. Find the willing participants, and that's rebuild momentum. That's just a principle of change. So look for the pull, is where someone told me recently, and I thought that was a good way to put it. And the other thing is that I often recommend, this is a little technical, but I find it's near magic, is whoever the relevant stakeholders are in a given environment. Okay, maybe it's a few particular influencers, maybe it's your user base, whatever it is. You know, find the people that are the most important people to have on board. And obviously, the bigger the project, the harder it is to get to everybody. But whatever that list is, I always call it getting their DNA on it. So another one of the kind of magic points of low code is, remember, doing the development work is potentially much less risky, much cheaper, much faster, much easier than in a high code traditional development environment. Which means you can put stuff in that may not be important. Right? You can put stuff in that may not be critical to the ultimate goal of the project. But what you do if you do that, if you have a particularly important stakeholder who says, we need this feature, right? If you do it to show them that you care and you're there to help them, then all of a sudden they really care about the solution, right? Because now it's their baby. It's not manipulative. I remember as a consultant, I would do this all the time. I would say, you know what? That is not the reason I'm here, but because it's important to you and I want you to be happy, I'm going to put that thing in. And I would do it. And by golly, someone who was out to get me would become the biggest advocate for the project. So the same principle applies at all levels of scale. Like, you have people who you want to embrace what it is you're trying to do or teach them or help them do. You have to show them what they think matters. And if it's really a bad idea and you really can't or shouldn't do it, you have to explain very thoroughly This is why we're not going to do this, because this is the reason. This guy is this group has this need, this group has this need, there's this implication, da 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 da. It's not that I don't want to help you, I really do want to help you, but there's all these things. And I mean, if you do it that way, and I get that, you got to think about scale and picking your battles and what stakeholders to focus on. But I mean, if that's sort of your overriding ethos, start with people that are willing. You're not there to produce headcount, and then try to get people's DNA on it. I mean, the buy-in can become remarkable, right? Everybody's in it. At least that's what I've observed.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Great, thank you guys. So the last question then I have for you, so just so you both know, we actually reached out to everyone that registered for this webinar, and we asked them if they had any questions for you guys. And one question that kept coming up was people want to hear some success stories. So they want to hear some efficiencies and savings that you've seen organizations once they've started to digitize. So are there any that pop to mind or stories that you could share today that our audience would love to hear?
Yeah, sure. I can. I mean, we've got a couple here, and then maybe John, you can chip in a few as well. So, I mean, there's one in the construction sector where we were working with a particular organisation who were involved in one of the UK's biggest infrastructure projects, and they were enthusiastic about process automation, and they identified one particular process where they saved. In just one particular project, they saved just under £80,000. But that saving was enough to justify the overall investment in process automation. They subsequently went on and automated over 50 processes. But that one particular process managed to save them a considerable amount of money, and also it took a lot of risk out of their own internal processes and administration as well. So I mean, that's one way of measuring it, is obviously in the kind of hard cash savings, but I mean, a more potentially an easier way to measure the return on investment is actually in terms of hours savings. So we've other good stories around that, and one particular customer, they spent a lot of time actually measuring their processes before automation, and at the end of automating 6 core processes. This is a college, so they automated processes for administration staff, and also processes that students were directly involved in. So after automating their 6 processes there, they were saving just under 5,000 hours per year. So that's a significant amount of time saved. And they did a great job, in fairness to them, of actually calculating those kind of savings, and of understanding the before situation, and then being able to measure against the after situation. So I could give a few more examples, but I'm interested to hear some from John as well.
I got some good ones. Very good example. Auto dealer group in the UK, 50, 60 dealerships. They rolled up through one of the big automakers of the world. Citizen development, lean team, one guy to start, realized he needed to digitize and automate everything, because they had a bunch of systems and apps, but it was all manual and paper-based, everything that was done in all the dealerships. It was highly variable, invisible, all that. So he got low code, and his very first project was an experiment. And he digitized the trade-in valuation process. So you're going to trade in your car, buy a new one. So that how you valued a car was every salesperson did it differently in all the dealerships and all that. So he wove together the APIs and put the logic in and created it. And with just that first experiment, they improved profitability on used cars by 60%. That was one thing, the first thing. And since then, they basically digitized lots of their value streams. His team's, 6 or 7 people now. I mean, EX, CX, and profitability are all much higher. I don't know what how all those things are quantified, but the very first experiment, it was this big boom. I think that's basically the principle of digitizing everything, is it's almost immeasurable.
Yeah, sure.
Another example, big telecom in Asia, 8,000 people. They did a hackathon. Had a few hundred people come in and start building apps on this platform. I think they're up to about 200 apps now, about 700 people. They're trained, about 100 active developers. They estimate for all the processes those 200 apps cover, they have about an 80% efficiency improvement in all those processes. They did some calculations on that. And they also tried to quantify the development savings. So if you'd gone and coded those things, which they never would have done anyway, but minus the licensing costs, calculating all the time and so on, they figured they saved about $7 million in just development costs for making those apps. And I think it's actually, they never would have made them, so it's almost an irrelevant number. But that's their example. And One of my favorites is this company that it's a big manufacturer. They bought a manufacturing execution system, spent a few million, euros or whatever on it. Tried to roll it out across 7 plants, I think it was. And I always emphasize that being digital means everything about the business is in the software. Well, if you're improving your processes in plants and then you bring in standard software, that means each plant's going to be at a different point and have different things they do and so on, and they couldn't align to the software. So they tried for several years to get everybody to do it, and they couldn't. So they canned it, and they brought in this platform, and they had the manufacturing engineers and the continuous improvement coordinators. So these were kids out of college who were put on plant floors to learn the business. They made the manufacturing execution system instead in this platform, okay? So it's about 45 apps. I think it runs like 1 million transactions a month. And it costs about 10% of what the manufacturing execution system cost. And it's truly like citizen development. They have this continuous improvement culture in the plants, and they make apps to solve problems. And I don't know what the business benefit of having a system when there was no system was before in that case. But I do know that just they bought the creme de la creme thing, threw it away, and spent 10% and created this culture, and it's way, way better and faster and cheaper. It's complex too. There's a bunch of IoT use cases and machine interfaces. So yeah, it's real. There's a lot of these really clear ROIs in citizen development in my experience.
Yeah, and I'm sure that we could chat all day about some great success stories, but just we're tight on time, so I'm going to actually move on to the next slide if that's okay. So thank you so much for sharing, and just a reminder to anyone, if they do have any questions, to pop them into the Q&A section, and we'll try and squeeze in as many as we can at the end. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Jared. He is going to chat a little bit about FlowForma process automation and give you some more information. That's okay. So I'll hand it over to you, Jared.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much. Yeah, so I suppose, I mean, I'm sure you're picking this up as we go through our conversation here. In FlowForma, we really strongly believe in the whole concept of no code. The original product, when it was designed and built, was all about enabling business people to actually take control of process digitization and enabling them to actually do it themselves. And that was in response to kind of the traditional slow speed of rollout of BPM initiatives, as myself and John have been talking about there just a little while ago. So it's core to our values that everything we do is no code. So in terms then of actually moving forward with process automation initiatives, the whole idea of one process at a time is something we like to talk about. And when we look at some of our customers who have achieved really large-scale process automation in terms of the number of processes they have automated, they all made took that first step and started with one particular process, and that process became a kind of cornerstone of their overall digital transformation journey. So I think automating your business one process at a time does help manage that whole concept of change within the organization and ensure success. Sharpening minds to unleash innovation, we've spoken about that earlier on as well. And I think, again, getting those cornerstone processes in place so that people can visualize and understand the kind of things that can be achieved with process automation, but particularly what can be achieved with no-code process automation, where you can iterate through ideas, you can respond very quickly to requests for change and all those kind of things. I think once you get that going, then people's minds wake up to what they can ask for and what can be achieved, and indeed what they can do themselves. So I think all of that then leads to better customer experiences where your customers are interacting with your business. You've got strong processes internally in your business, and they're all working in an efficient and effective way, and that ultimately leads to a better experience from your customer. So I think that's just the 3 points I want to make there as well.
Great.
So for those of you that don't actually know FlowForma, as a company, we're an award-winning provider of process automation solutions, and our FlowForma tool, it's been recognized as revolutionizing the way business process management can actually be achieved, and how you can go about automating your processes and digitizing those. So our whole approach is no code and logic only, and that's been the way it has been from the very start. So we've over 200,000 people at this stage using our product across the globe, and we've received multiple awards from Microsoft in terms of the innovations that we've brought to their various platforms, and also obviously we feature in Forrester's various waves as one of the no-code providers. Thanks, Ursula. So yeah, just in terms of what we're doing, so for those of you who use our product already, there's three areas that we're looking at in 2022. So one of the trends we've noticed is that a lot more organizations are using Engage, which is part of the FlowForma platform that allows you involve people outside the boundaries of your organization in your processes. So we've had quite a few customers using this and building it out in 2021. And what it does ultimately is make your internal processes more efficient and give you better quality information, data coming into your processes at the actual start, and it engages your customers in a different way as well. So in 2022, we're going to be investing more in that based on the success we've had to date. And if you're not already using that, you might talk to customer services and they might explain to you how it can be used and how it might be relevant to your own situation. Analytics, we spoke about gathering data and getting it out there and understanding what your existing processes are delivering. So this is an area we're always working on. It's something we will be improving again in 2022. So we have a whole layer of process data, operational data that we're capturing, and we want to make sure that people can use that in the tools that they want to actually analyze that information. So we're working on that. And I spoke about integration already. As I said, we had some considerable success with our REST API integration, which we launched there in 2021. I'm going to continue working on that and also integrate with other integration platforms to extend out our capabilities further there. So again, if you haven't looked at the REST API integration on your existing customer, I'd suggest that you actually do so. That is three things that we're looking at this year amongst some of the other improvements we're making, but they're kind of three themes for us. Customers here. They're just some of our banners there. I think if you look at Dresser, who are based in the US, they're an engineering company. There's some good testimonials there from them, and they developed their own citizen development capability. It accelerated their whole transformation in terms of automating their processes, and also allowed them to do so in a much more speedy and effective way than the platform they were currently using. So that's just one there. And there's also a great webinar with Morgan Construction, which you can also access on our website, and you can listen to their story. That's a Canadian company, and their whole reason for looking to automate their processes was they do a huge amount of contractor onboarding in the construction sector, and they were currently running their whole process, all spreadsheets and whiteboards, etc., and they really needed to automate that quickly. And then the automation led to them getting a huge amount more insight into the process, and then that information is quite enthusiastically awaited by their senior management team as they understand how their whole onboarding process is going and how many people they've actually managed to recruit. So there's just a couple of examples of some of the customers that we're engaged with.
Great, thank you so much for that, Jared. I know we were tight on time, so I'm sure you had to fly through those slides. Thank you so much. But yeah, so we just have literally 2 minutes left, but we might get through a question or two if possible. But one question that came in for you guys is, how would you assess, or how would you pick, I suppose, who would be the best person to become a citizen developer, or who is the citizen developer in an organization?
Find your natural problem.
Go with that.
Find your natural problem solvers, the people who want to make things better. If you want to, you can give them an aptitude test or something. I've run across people who've done that. But the people who want to change things are motivated, they're the ones. It's not the people writing macros necessarily. It's the people who understand the problem and want to fix it.
Perfect. And you agree with that, Jared? You're happy with
that?
Yeah,
I very much agree with that, and I'd say that's our experience as well. When we engage people in our Sure Start program, we like to see those kind of problem solvers who have good understanding of the business, the organization, and want to get things done. They're always good people to be working with when you're trying to do this.
Great.
It's not the macro jockeys. It could be, but that's not what you're looking for necessarily.
Perfect. Okay, and then quickly, Jared, you might just take this one here. So someone is asking, with the adoption of no-code process automation strategy, how quickly can organizations go live with a digitized process?
Yeah, this is actually one of our core business measurements internally, and what we're always trying to do is work with our customers to get them to achieve return on investment in a very short space of time. So, I mean, we've got lots of examples of this. One of the more recent ones is we've a particular customer who, I think it was 35 days working with us through our Sure Start program to get us from initial concept through to actual live operational process, and that included training their people up on using the FlowForma platform. And I mean, that's up and running in a very short space of time. So you can, it depends on the organization, but it's something you can definitely push and achieve something in a very short space of time.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I think that literally is all we have time for in regards to questions. So I'm really sorry if we didn't get to answer your question, and we will have someone in our team get back to you as soon as possible. But before we end for today, I just have one last slide to share with you all. So just to thank you all for watching. Thank you, John and Jared, for joining me today. Thank you for all your great insights. Really love the Q&A style and love hearing your trends for 2022. So a reminder to the audience that there are some nice resources in the accessible column on your right hand side, some case studies there too. And if you want to sign up for a free trial, you can pop over to the FlowForma website. We do have a short survey that we would ask you to fill out towards the end. Just 3 questions there, and it really helps us generate more fresh new content for you guys too. So again, thank you very much, Jared and John, and hopefully we'll see you very soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you guys. Bye now. Bye everyone.